Welcome to the debate. You know, when we try to picture the ultimate unshakable store of human wealth, we usually imagine a vault.
Right, like a massive, impenetrable room.
Exactly. Buried deep underground, sealed behind layers of steel and concrete, and, complex time locks. It's heavy, it is completely immobile, and it's profoundly physical.
But
But it's changing.
it is. If you walk into a modern server farm today, you are going to smell the ozone and hear a very different kind of vault. It's just rows upon rows of blinking lights, humming with massive amounts of electricity, and it secures value not through physical weight, but through thermodynamics and cryptography.
It really is a striking visual contrast, isn't it? Because we are essentially looking at two entirely different philosophical definitions of, well, what makes something unassailable.
Right. On the one hand, you have this elemental heavy metal forged in the collision of dying stars billions of years ago, and on the other, you have a highly complex, decentralized software protocol anchored by, global computing power.
Precisely. And that stark contrast is exactly what brings us here today. We are examining whether gold or Bitcoin represents the most robust store of value and really the foundational asset for the future of human civilization.
Which is a huge question.
It is, especially with the incredibly rapid advancements we're seeing right now in artificial intelligence, commercial space exploration, and nuclear energy production. Our historical definitions of scarcity and systemic risk are being fundamentally challenged.
And this debate emerges directly from an in-depth analytical breakdown in the source material, which compares the systemic vulnerabilities of both of these assets side by side.
Yeah. In my position today, the side I'll be arguing is that Bitcoin's mathematical scarcity and its digital velocity make it the uniquely superior asset for an advancing, technologically driven civilization.
And I'll be taking the other side. I'm arguing that gold's physical independence and its elemental nature provide an unmatched, unbreakable foundational store of value that completely transcends infrastructural dependencies.
So diving right into it. As I look at the material, I find myself deeply convinced that Bitcoin fundamentally shifts the goalposts of what constitutes a store of value. We really have to face the reality that gold's so-called absolute scarcity, this thing we've relied on for thousands of years, is actually, well, it's an illusion.
An illusion? That's a strong word for something that has held value for millennia.
But it is. It's merely a temporary technological limitation, not a mathematical certainty. I mean, we are already seeing AI drastically lower the cost of discovering hidden deep earth gold deposits that naturally increases its supply elasticity.
Right, better mapping, cheaper extraction.
Exactly. Bitcoin, conversely, possesses a truly inelastic supply. No matter how much computing power or advanced AI is deployed to try and mine more of it, the network it mathematically adjusts its mining difficulty every 2016 blocks.
The difficulty adjustment.
Yeah, it maintains a strict, unyielding issuance schedule that human ingenuity simply cannot cheat.
I hear that, but I just can't shake the physical reality of gold. For me, the research points to gold remaining the ultimate insurance policy.
Even with AI making it easier to find?
Even then, because its ultimate strength is its physical survivalism. It provides an unbreakable foundational store of value that completely ignores infrastructural dependencies. Think about it. Gold requires absolutely zero infrastructure to store passively.
True. It just sits there.
Right, it doesn't need an internet connection. It is entirely immune to electromagnetic pulses or global network blackouts. Bitcoin essentially trades that absolute physical autonomy for digital velocity.
Well, it leverages the network, sure.
But it requires an active, power-consuming global network just to exist. So while Bitcoin might thrive in a perfectly functioning, highly advanced digital society, gold remains the ultimate protection for a highly unpredictable physical world.
It is wild to think about a digital network being that unyielding compared to physical metal. But if we're going to bet on Bitcoin's math over gold's physical nature, we really have to ask if gold is actually as scarce as we think it is.
Okay, where are you going with this?
Well, this brings us to the nuclear physics part of the analysis. Because, for millennia, gold was the king of money simply because human beings couldn't fake it and couldn't easily find more of it.
Right, the alchemy problem. You can't just cook it up in a lab.
Exactly. But that technological limitation is coming to an end. The source material details this fascinating July 2025 research from Marathon Fusion, looking at how future commercial nuclear fusion reactors could essentially function as high-output gold factories.
Wait, let's pause on that for a second, because that sounds like literal science fiction. You are talking about transmuting elements.
I am, and the mechanism is incredible. In a standard 1 gigawatt commercial fusion reactor, you are smashing isotopes of hydrogen together at extreme temperatures.
Right, to generate power.
Yes, but when they fuse, a massive swarm of high-energy neutrons flies outward. The proposed method involves lining the reactor's inner walls with mercury-198.
Which is a stable isotope, right?
Yeah, it's highly stable and relatively cheap. So, those high-energy neutrons physically slam into the mercury and knock a piece right out of the nucleus. That newly unstable mercury then naturally decays into gold-197.
Huh.
And to be clear, that is the exact stable, non-radioactive gold found in nature. According to the physics models they ran, a single 1 gigawatt plant could sweat out roughly 5,000 kilograms. That's about 11,000 pounds of gold every single year, purely as a byproduct of generating electricity.
That is a staggering amount of gold for one facility.
Right. Humanity mastering fusion fundamentally turns gold into a localized power grid byproduct. Once you have commercial fusion, its absolute scarcity is effectively dead.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Go for it.
If we look closely at the material, the theoretical physics of transmutation might be perfectly sound on a whiteboard, but the material reality keeps this from being any sort of near-term threat to gold. We really have to draw a hard line here between chemistry and nuclear physics.
How so?
Well, look at the synthetic diamond market. When that market crashed, it was because a diamond is just a molecule. It's just a specific arrangement of carbon atoms.
Sure, heat and pressure.
Exactly. Scientists figured out how to use high pressure to force incredibly cheap carbon atoms into a crystalline lattice. The process became cheap, and the market was flooded.
But you're saying you can't use the diamond trick on gold.
No, you absolutely cannot. You can't just apply pressure. Gold is element 79 on the periodic table. You can't just rearrange atoms, you have to fundamentally create new atomic nuclei. Now, Glenn Seaborg actually did this back in 1980 with a particle accelerator.
Right, he transmuted bismuth into gold.
He did, but the energy required meant it cost roughly $1 quadrillion to produce a single ounce. And even if Marathon Fusion scales this new method you're talking about, we are looking at severe, almost comical constraints outlined in the source material.
You mean the radiation issue?
Yes, the fusion-synthesized gold is chaotic. It doesn't come out as a shiny bar. It gets mixed with other highly radioactive isotopes of mercury and thallium. So legally speaking, it is classified as nuclear waste the moment it comes out of the machine.
Which means it has to be contained.
It requires a 14 to 18-year cooldown period in a heavily shielded specialized vault before the radiation decays enough for a human being to even handle it safely. Furthermore, commercial fusion is the holy grail of energy. We don't have a single commercial plant on the grid yet. Most experts predict it will be the late 2030s or early 2040s before we even see a working prototype, let alone a fleet of them mass-producing gold.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently, because you are focusing heavily on when this happens rather than the underlying mechanism itself.
Well, timelines matter in finance.
They do, but even if it takes until 2040 or even 2060, the mechanism of gold scarcity is proven to be elastic. It is fundamentally vulnerable to the physics of the universe. If the price of gold goes high enough, human ingenuity will eventually synthesize it profitably.
Assuming we get there.
Right. Or, as we see happening today, mining companies will use advanced AI to map seismic data and drill exactly where high-grade deposits sit, continually compounding the dilution of the supply. But with Bitcoin, the mechanism is completely different.
Because it's code.
Because it's absolute math. If someone invents infinite energy via fusion tomorrow or creates a literal AI superintelligence, they cannot sweat more Bitcoin out of the system. The protocol simply recalculates the mathematical difficulty. The supply cap of 21 million remains completely unbudged. It is mathematically absolute in a way physical matter can never be.
That's a really compelling way to look at the mechanism. But let's pivot to the flip side of that coin. Have you considered what happens if this grand, highly advanced technological future you are banking on doesn't arrive as smoothly as planned?
You mean systematic failure?
Yes. You are assuming a continuous, unbroken upward trajectory of human infrastructure. But what if the power grid fails long before we reach some fusion-powered utopia? If we face a global collapse, what the material calls Phase 1, the Deep Dark Age, Bitcoin is entirely useless. It becomes utterly frozen in unbroadcastable private keys.
I mean, if the entire global grid permanently fails, we drop straight to the absolute bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Neither Bitcoin nor gold matters in that first phase.
Precisely. In a true collapse, human psychology shifts entirely away from complex finance. Utility becomes the singular metric of value. Clean drinking water, or the equipment to filter it, becomes the most valuable currency on Earth.
Ammo, medicine, the basics.
Exactly. Portable battery power paired with solar panels becomes a massive force multiplier for running medical devices and shortwave radios. And we don't have to guess about this. We have modern historical precedent.
You're referring to the siege of Sarajevo.
Yes, from 1992 to 1995. The city was completely cut off from power, water, and supply lines for over 3 years. Traditional wealth entirely inverted. There are documented accounts of people who tried to buy a can of beef with gold jewelry, and they had to drastically overpay.
Because nobody wanted gold.
Why would they? The shopkeeper didn't want a heavy piece of metal. He couldn't drink it. He couldn't use it to patch a hole in his roof. The actual functioning currencies of the siege became disposable lighters, AAA batteries, antibiotics, and ammunition.
Right, a utility over abstract value.
Gold suffers from what economists call the double coincidence of wants problem. It is merely a heavy, shiny rock until a society manages to rebuild itself and decides to establish a local market again. But once that happens, gold is the ultimate passive post-collapse asset to store your wealth across a dark age and hand it to the next generation.
Let me jump in there because I completely agree that water and batteries are the true Phase 1 survival assets. But where these two assets violently diverge is Phase 2, local reconstruction.
Okay, how so?
Gold's recovery is completely bound to physical geography and, more importantly, human trust. Think about what it takes to use gold again in a recovering society. You need local physical security so a warlord doesn't just shoot you and take it.
Well, physical security is a given in Phase 2.
Sure, but you also need a highly trusted scale to weigh it. You need chemical tests so you aren't handed gold-plated tungsten. Bitcoin, however, fundamentally alters how a dark age ends because it only needs alternative physics to reboot.
Alternative physics? What do you mean by that?
I mean, Bitcoin doesn't need a global internet connection from a traditional terrestrial ISP like Comcast or AT&T to turn back on. Are you familiar with the Blockstream satellite network?
I know they broadcast the ledger, but break down how that actually functions in a grid-down scenario.
Sure. Blockstream currently operates a network of geosynchronous satellites. Just to make sure we're visualizing this, these satellites orbit at the exact same speed that the Earth rotates, meaning they stay locked over one specific geographic spot in the sky.
Right.
And they continuously broadcast the entire Bitcoin blockchain down to Earth, 24/7, covering nearly the entire globe. So, in a collapsed, recovering region, if a community has a small solar panel, a battery pack, and a basic satellite dish, they can sync a full node entirely independent of terrestrial infrastructure.
But how do they send a transaction back up? The satellite is just broadcasting down, isn't it?
Exactly. The downlink is satellite, but transactions can be signed offline on a laptop and then broadcast out over amateur ham radio or localized mesh networks.
Ham radio Bitcoin. That's fascinating.
Right? As long as one single cluster of computers is running somewhere on Earth, the global anchor survives. The moment a recovering community hooks a generator to a radio tower, they don't have to slowly reinvent centralized banks and armored trucks to scale gold. They are instantly, seamlessly plugged back into a flawless, uncorrupted global financial network.
It's an ingenious workaround, I'll give you that. But you are still relying on a highly complex, fragile web of orbital mechanics and radio frequencies just to access your wealth.
I wouldn't call it fragile. I'd call it the ultimate evolution of velocity. Because if you look at the history of money, it is entirely dictated by velocity and telecommunications. Look at the classic telegraph lesson from the source material. Why did gold lose its status as the world's base money?
Because it couldn't keep up with the speed of trade?
Right, it was physically too heavy to move at the speed of expanding global commerce. The invention of the telegraph allowed for rapid cross-border communication, which necessitated paper receipts and electronic ledgers. But because the physical gold was way too heavy to move across telegraph lines, it had to be pooled and locked into centralized state vaults.
Which ultimately made it susceptible to capture.
Exactly. That physical centralization paved the way for fractional reserve banking and eventually total government seizure, like FDR's Executive Order 6102 in 1933, where citizens were forced to hand over their gold.
Right, the gold confiscation.
Gold lost because it lacked velocity in a telecommunications age. Bitcoin solves this velocity problem natively. It moves at the speed of light while maintaining absolute personal custody. In the space infrastructure we just talked about, it isolates Bitcoin from terrestrial state capture entirely. Companies like SpaceChain have already launched orbital nodes, including hardware on the International Space Station. They use an unpluggable 3-layer multisig architecture.
Unpack that multisig for me.
It means your wallet requires multiple keys to open. To move your funds, you might need a key on your physical phone, a key held at an Earth-based security firm, and a third key operating on a satellite in low Earth orbit. A state actor cannot just kick down a door and raid a server room to seize your assets. They would have to literally intercept an encrypted uplink in the vacuum of space.
I come at it from a different way, because to me, there's a profound irony here.
Irony? How?
You are arguing that Bitcoin successfully avoids the centralization trap of gold by relying on multi-million-dollar space infrastructure launched by highly centralized aerospace corporations and state governments.
Well,
You are outsourcing the physical security of the network to the very entities you are trying to route around.
but the protocol itself remains decentralized. The satellite is just a broadcast relay. It's not a central bank dictating monetary policy.
Fair enough, but let's really test the limits of this digital velocity you value so highly. You mentioned space infrastructure. Let's push that to its logical conclusion. What happens when human civilization actually expands beyond Earth's orbit?
Multiplanetary expansion.
Yes. What happens when we colonize Mars? If Bitcoin is genuinely the foundational asset for a hyper-advanced future, it has to function at that scale. But there's a hard wall of physics that decentralized networks absolutely can't cheat: the speed of light.
You're referring to the one-way light time between the planets.
Exactly. Depending on where Earth and Mars are in their respective orbits around the Sun, the communication delay between the two planets is anywhere from 3 to 22 minutes. A single, synchronized global Bitcoin mining network across both planets is physically impossible.
Because of the delay.
Think about the mechanics. The Bitcoin network produces a new block of transactions roughly every 10 minutes. If Martian colonists set up mining rigs and try to mine directly on Earth's main network, they are completely out of luck.
Because of the orphan rate.
Right, and let's pause to make sure we're visualizing this orphan rate because it's critical. Imagine taking a final exam. You finish the test and sprint to the professor's office to hand it in, but because the hallway is miles long, it takes you 12 minutes to get there.
By the time you arrive, they're on the next test.
Yes, by the time you arrive, the professor's already posted the answer key and handed out the next test. Your test is completely invalid. That is what happens to Mars. By the time an Earth block reaches Mars 22 minutes later, Earth is already 2 blocks ahead.
So they constantly lose the race?
Mars would suffer a nearly 100% orphan rate. They would be wasting immense amounts of energy, mining blocks that the Earth network constantly rejects for being late. The ledger physically breaks across planetary distances. How can Bitcoin be the foundational asset of the future if its core consensus mechanism shatters the moment we leave the Earth-Moon system?
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Because the engineering and cryptography communities have already modeled the solution to this exact physical constraint, and it doesn't require breaking the laws of physics.
So how do you fix a 22-minute delay?
You simply don't try to force a single synchronous network across the solar system. You use a multi-planetary Bitcoin architecture. It doesn't require changing Bitcoin's base code at all. It splits the system into local execution zones that are linked by asynchronous bridges.
So wait, you're just centralizing Mars.
Not at all. You establish a Martian comet chain, essentially a layer 2 network. Earth remains the layer 1 global anchor, the ultimate master ledger for the species. On Mars, colonists would use a local network, like the Lightning Network, for immediate millisecond retail transactions.
Okay, for everyday purchases.
Exactly. You're buying your Martian coffee on a local network. They would use smart contracts specifically configured with latency-aware time locks to handle those local transfers. Then, for planetary settlement, you use delay disruption tolerant networking, or DTN.
I've heard DTN called the interplanetary internet, but wait, how do you prevent double spending across a 22-minute communication gap? Someone could theoretically spend coins on Mars and Earth simultaneously.
You prevent it through a cryptographic primitive called Proof of Transit Timestamping, or POT. Because data bundles flying through space can get delayed by solar flares or planetary alignment, you can't trust a simple digital clock timestamp. POT treats data packets like a physical passport at border control.
Okay, walk me through the passport analogy.
Think of a transaction leaving Mars as a traveler. When the data leaves the ground antenna on Mars, it gets a cryptographic stamp. As it travels, it hits a deep space relay, gets another stamp. It hits a lunar relay, gets another stamp.
So it tracks the physical journey of the data.
Yes. By the time it finally hits Earth, it has an unbreakable chronological trail of ink. You can't fake the journey. Because every hot is cryptographically verified, you can't double spend the funds while the signal was in transit.
And it settles the balances periodically.
At regular intervals, the Mars network aggregates thousands of these local transactions and settles them in bulk across the deep space link to Earth's Layer 1. Even if the planets pass behind the Sun and cause a complete 2-week communications blackout, the Martian Layer 2 economy continues natively. When the planets clear, the space bridges automatically reconnect and clear the backlog using that passport stamp audit trail.
It's quite the setup.
We are talking about a beautifully software-defined settlement system moving value at the speed of light. Compare that to gold. If you tried to build an Earth-Mars economy on gold, you would be forced to physically load heavy metal onto rockets and burn precious rocket fuel for 7 months just to settle trade imbalances between planetary central banks.
I will absolutely concede that shipping physical gold across the solar system on chemical rockets is a complete absurdity.
Right?
That to me, that merely highlights the fundamental difference in what these two assets actually are. Bitcoin is a network, gold is an element. Everything you just described, delay-tolerant networking, latency-aware time locks, cryptographic passports, orbital relays, it is a breathtaking tower of technological abstraction.
It is advanced, yes.
It is undeniably brilliant, but it is deeply fragile. It requires an unbroken chain of advanced manufacturing, precise orbital mechanics, and constant massive energy generation. If any one of those links breaks, the system halts.
But human history is literally the history of building and maintaining those complex systems. We don't permanently regress. The whole point of civilization is maintaining the tower.
We may not permanently regress as a species, but we absolutely suffer localized, regional, and sometimes systemic shocks. And when those shocks happen, gold does not require an audit trail to prove its existence. It does not require a satellite to confirm its value.
When you stack these two against each other, it really forces you to choose your apocalypse, doesn't it?
It really does.
If you think we are heading for a hyper-advanced, space-faring future, Bitcoin represents the only asset mathematically and technologically equipped for that reality. Its inelastic supply mechanism guarantees absolute scarcity in a way gold simply cannot.
Even with the fusion constraints.
Especially with them. As AI dramatically improves geological prospecting and as nuclear physics unlocks the ability to synthesize gold from mercury in commercial fusion reactors, gold supply is destined for compounding dilution. Furthermore, Bitcoin's ability to leverage space infrastructure gives it an unkillable distribution network completely independent of earthly state capture. It is a monetary system built of mathematics and light, perfectly aligned with the trajectory of human progress.
And on the other side of that coin, if you are looking at the fragility of that progress, gold remains the ultimate worst-case physical survival asset. The very infrastructure that gives Bitcoin its incredible velocity, the global power grids, the ISPs, the orbital relays, is its greatest systemic vulnerability.
The dependency problem.
Exactly. In a true collapse scenario, human psychology inevitably reverts to physical tangibility. While water and batteries will keep you alive in the immediate aftermath, gold serves as the unbreakable insurance policy to carry wealth across a dark age. Its absolute independence from telecommunications means it is immune to the fragile digital infrastructure humanity is constantly building. It may not be the highly engineered money of a multiplanetary future, but it is the ultimate protection against a return to a primitive past.
It is such a fascinating duality. Examining these assets side by side reveals far more than just their individual mechanics. It gives us profound insights into how society attempts to balance the desire for absolute scarcity against the relentless march of technological progress.
Agreed. The source material leaves so much more to explore regarding human psychology in times of crisis, and the fundamental nature of what we actually choose to value. It ultimately asks us to weigh our faith in the resilience of our technology against our respect for the raw physics of the natural world.
And it brings us right back to where we started, the vault.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we place our deepest trust in the immovable weight of a physical metal buried in the earth, knowing it can never be disconnected? Or do we trust a cryptographic ledger, constantly moving at the speed of light, hovering in the silence of low Earth orbit? That is a choice every listener will have to weigh for themselves. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.